Everyone, thank you for tuning in to this installment of the P2 podcast. You have myself and Coach Bryce here again to just kind of talk with you guys again about the things that we see in the industry, that we see with our clients. You can tune in anywhere, that being YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, anywhere that will take our money. Thank you again for showing up, and we hope you enjoy.
I don't know why. I feel like it's so weird whenever people will be like, Coach Bryce. I think that sounds so weird.
Yeah, I don't know, same thing. Coach Chris, Coach Bryce. I'm like Chris and Bryce. It seems easier, but whatever.
Bro, I'm just Bryce. I'm not Coach Bryce. I'm just Bryce.
Just Bryce.
Bryce. All right. Now, yeah. So thank you, Chris, for the very brief and concise intro. Always appreciate that. So today what we're gonna talk about is some mental health stuff. So this is obviously a very sensitive topic. And I think that both of us are going to do our best to treat it as the sensitive topic that it is, while also, like for myself, I know that some thoughts I have on this are probably going to be, I don't know, maybe a little upsetting for some people, but like at the same time, I think that the frame and the context of it is super important. So we'll definitely get into that. But obviously this is an incredibly broad and deep topic as well. So we're not going to be able to get anywhere near comprehensive or as deep as we would like to into some of this stuff. We're probably going to go off on many tangents, many rants, and we might keep it pretty surface level. But at the same time, I do think that both of us have quite a bit to say on this topic, starting with our clients and how some of our observations as coaches have influenced the way that we think and approach mental health. And then obviously, like as we continue through the conversation, I think we'll maybe get into some of our own personal experiences. And then from there, who fucking knows where we'll end up. So yeah. Again, yeah, just kind of starting this off, I think that it's probably a good bet for us to keep it a little bit more fitness oriented.
Yeah.
So for myself, like I've been doing this for quite a long time. And I work at this point with mostly like pretty high level athletes, mostly bodybuilding competitors and things like that. And if there's any demographic that has some really in need of help, mental health issues, or, I guess we can label body dysmorphia, we can label, food problems. What is the word I'm looking for? Why can I not think of that?
Just like relationship.
Yeah, relationship with food. I was gonna say food insecurity. I was like, that's not the. Well, yeah, like poor relationships with food, all of those things, and I think that like classically we think of mental health more as like depression, anxiety, mania, bipolar, those types of things. But whenever we're dealing with it in the fitness space, it is a little bit more expansive because then you start to bring in a lot of other variables. But with the clientele that I typically work with these days, it is honestly amazing how the most seemingly put together people that you will ever encounter are holding on by a freaking thread whenever you really get to know them and you really start to kind of peel back the layers. And I definitely don't think that that all of the contextual components of mental health in fitness are talked about nearly enough. On the other side of that, I think publicly outside of fitness, they're almost talked about too much, but we can get into that later on. But things like body dysmorphia, right? I think that it is probably the thing that I deal with the absolute most with all of my clientele is trying to figure out a way for them to be okay with the way that they look in the moment all the time. Like just always be okay, be content with how you look in the moment. It's difficult because if you're working with people that are like very high achievers and they're competitors or potentially they're professional athletes, and they build that status based off of how they look, it can be really challenging. But that's something that I have found to be probably the most surprising aspect of working with the clientele that I do. And I never would have expected that whenever I started working with a lot of like really high level athletes is that, man, there's a lot going on under the hood. And I don't know like what your experience is, but I mean, we've obviously talked about it, but like, maybe if you want to add some context to that, so I can build off of what you say too.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to people are people. And there is an otherness that we kind of categorize people at least into, like when we see them at a certain level, right? IFBB pros, pro athletes that are, field sport athletes, et cetera, et cetera. You kind of go, okay, like what, how bad could their life be? Like subconsciously, your brain's almost want to do like everything looks good. You look good, life looks good, like everything looks smooth. Um, and it just lends itself to the fact that like you don't know anyone's story, right? We mentioned this before in a podcast or two ago, where it's like you don't know what it took for someone to get there. You sit there and you look at someone, you say their life must be this, but you don't know someone else's story. It's really, really eye opening when you meet somebody and they are open with you, and all of a sudden you start hearing like, wow, like your life sounds a lot like mine. Even something like just slight diversion coming right back. I was talking to my little brother about like he's like, I'm different. I just think differently. I just think differently. I'm like, have you ever read a book by like, say, like read a biography by like, Elon Musk or not by, but like Elon Musk's biography, Steve Jobs, all of these guys, troubled things that happened in their life. Like they seemingly like, dude, this person's life is awesome. But then you get to the nitty gritty of it. And I'm like, I guarantee that if you're reading it, most readers can go, I can relate to that. Poor relationship with a parent, poor relationship with food, poor relationship with self-image. And so you bring it back to these athletes and there definitely is a perception. And I think that I might even like add to it because now they feel like they have to uphold whatever the perception is of them. And so I've definitely noticed it. And then you mix in the fact that, you are in a sport where it is all perception, right? It's not about what you can actually go out and do. It's all about what you look like, what your life looks like, what your smile looks like, what you look like in a bikini on stage. So, I mean, it's definitely like when you think about it objectively, it makes sense, but definitely like you get kind of shocked, kind of like with a culture shock when you start working with people and you assume a certain level of like togetherness, like they're good. And it's just not that way.
It also makes it really challenging. I mean, I'm just gonna keep it a little bit more bodybuilding oriented right now because personally, that is the clientele that I mostly work with at the moment. But it does make it even worse whenever the whole sport that you compete in is based on strangers telling you that your body is either good enough or not good enough. And they're critiquing every aspect of your appearance, not even just your body. They're critiquing, if you're a woman, your hair, your makeup, your jewelry, the color of your suit that you're wearing. Like, I mean, it is insane. Like we know men that compete as well. I mean, they'll go get their hair done. They'll be wearing makeup. Like they're getting everything done. So you're getting critiqued down to the most minuscule degree by, again, strangers. These are mostly strangers. They're mostly people who, if it was turned around on them, it would be pretty problematic, So that, I think, tends to compound the issue because you're being literally put in order of you, I guess, or your appearance, but in reality, it feels like everything about you are this much worse or this much better than these other peers of yours, right? And for someone who is like mentally very, very, very resilient and can compartmentalize those things, they can shrug it off. They can be like, it is what it is. It's a sport. Like, shit happens. Fine. Not a big deal. For a lot of people, like that's pretty troubling, like that, especially if you're working really, really hard for a specific goal and you're being told all the time by everyone around you as you're working towards that goal that like, oh my God, you look so good. You look so amazing. This, all of that, you're being hyped up. And then you fall short of your goal, or you're disappointed by your placing, or you get some critique that really stings. I mean, these fucking judges say the dumbest shit, man. Like, it's crazy. I don't think that they think about the stuff that they're saying sometimes, and especially the population, the demographic that they're talking to. I mean, these are a lot of the time young women, and you're telling them things that like they need to improve on their body, where it's like, bro, what? And I mean, we know this for a fact because we work with a lot of clients, but like a lot of young women that compete in bodybuilding, bikini, any division there, like they will get breast augmentations just to be more competitive in the sport for no other reason than to improve their potential placings.
Right.
But let's just say that everybody in bodybuilding woke up tomorrow, all the judges, all of like the rules change, and we're like, actually, we don't want big breasts on stage. They're too distracting. We don't think that's part of the bodybuilding culture anymore. So we're going to start penalizing for obnoxiously large breasts. All of a sudden, man, like that's that's a pretty eye-opening problem or pretty eye-opening issue now. And the thing is we would see the opposite happen. Everyone would get breast reductions. And that, I think, is symptomatic of a gigantic cultural problem in bodybuilding to begin with. That's massively problematic. But that is probably a completely different thing that we could talk about at another time. But again, like these are very impressionable people for the most part, and they're a lot of times very competitive.
Mhm.
And there's at least a minority, if not a majority, of people that are doing this because they have low self-esteem issues and they think that competing or stepping on stage or doing well in bodybuilding or getting all of the compliments and the status thrown at them by their peers, they think that that is going to improve their self-esteem and make them have a better view of themselves. And in reality, it's the exact opposite, because everything that you're doing is now under a microscope and you're creating an illusion of an appearance that is unsustainable.
Yeah.
And everything is compared to your peak. And you always think about your peak and all of the compliments that people are giving you at your peak. And then that creates just this spiral downward in your ability to process where you are and what is realistic and what is healthy and what is sustainable. Just because you're so anchored to your peak, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, we see a lot of coaches that will prey on that too and be like, oh yeah, like just more, we've talked about more drugs, less food, more extreme, et cetera, et cetera. And the reality is there are so many people that like don't have like the mental health capacity. Like they are not resilient enough to be able to actually compete in
Yeah.
bodybuilding. A lot of people aren't mentally resilient enough to be able to compete in any sport, much less bodybuilding.
Yep.
And I don't think that people take that into account nearly enough or think about the potential consequences of what happens if I diet for 6 months and step on stage, it barely clothed, and have strangers tell me whether I look good enough or I don't look good enough. Like, what is the consequence of that for me in my head? But it is, it's something that people should weigh more heavily because it is very, very, very important.
It's something I actually talked to Dylan and a few other like coaches that I know, that there should be some sort of like one-on-one. And I mean, obviously this will never happen because we've also talked about like not specifically Dylan, but like coaches want to make money, right? They're not gonna potentially erode away incoming clientele by telling them that they don't think they're mentally, you know, in the spot to do this, right? Or maybe they don't feel comfortable taking on this client, right? And also that lends itself to like, who am I to tell you you are or aren't ready? But like there are glaring signs, right? Like, we've talked about people coming in and saying like 17, 18, 20-year-old girls saying, I'm going to do whatever it takes to become a pro. Like, why? Like this sport will take everything from you and give you nothing back. Like not even at the pro level. Like it will give you nothing back. And you, unless you have like something that anchors you, like this is why I do it, right? We know people who have whys who maybe their parents were pros or parents were competitors, and so like it's kind of in the family. They also have um that like shoulder that understands, right? They can go to their mom and their parents, and like that's really, really important. I think having the people around you that allow you to or remind you to put things in perspective, because we all will lose it, especially when you're talking about people who are on very little food. Sleep's probably fucked up because they're on very little food, right? They're on stimulants to keep themselves awake, possibly drugs. Uh, you're gonna lose sight of reality at some point, right? And then it is competition, right? It's competition. To your point, I won't say not everyone's made for it. And this is just my possibly completely way off base opinion, but I don't think it is that far off base. I think that bodybuilding attracts, it doesn't always attract high level athletes who are athletic somewhere else. It attracts people coming to prove themselves. It attracts people coming to find belonging, not someone who already has felt that, right? Not someone who's already been a part of a big team, for a while, a multitude of teams, met different people, had to work, but also has been like, hey, listen, you're not better than her. You're not better than him. And until you are, you're going to ride the bench. Until you are, you're going to play that position, not this position. When you start that off as a little kid, it sucks, but like you get used to it over and over again. And you learn how to take that like competitive edge and go, well, I'm going to make me better and hopefully make them better and the team better. But if you come fresh out, like, yeah, I was in dance, like, no offense to dancers are fantastic athletes, but I like, in a place where it's like, okay, well, now you're directly competing with the person right next to you that's on your team and the person next to you on the stage, the person next to you in the gym. And there's a million factors at play, right? It's not just how long they've had in the game. Have they been training longer than you? What drugs are they on? Genetically, are they just predispositioned to be better than you, right? And then we talk about like the female side of things. I think more so than the male side of things, like it goes into like your face, your makeup, what you look like. Like if you are an objectively more attractive female standing next to an objectively possibly less attractive female, the more attractive female may win purely because she is more attractive in the face and her whole body, as opposed to like, you can like, as a man, you can just be gargantuan, go on stage. And it isn't always about that, right? It's a bit more, I think, balanced there. It is definitely more beauty-esque when you have the women's side. So again, can you sit there, train 6 months, a year, go through an off season, go through in season, prep, diet all the way down, get on stage, come dead last and not have any of your own perception of self eroded away? That's a tough ask for anybody.
Yeah, no, I agree. And kind of what you were saying there at the end about it being more like beauty oriented. I mean, I would say that a lot, well, especially bikini is more of a pageant than anything. Like there have been times when it has turned a little bit more extreme in terms of like body composition, where it's like, hey, you need to be jacked, you need to be lean as well. But I feel like for every pendulum swing to the extreme, they kind of swing back to, okay, this is more pageant again, right? And I mean, I guess the complementary aspect of that for men is like men's physique, where it is a little bit more, like it's more pageant-esque, like there are more aspects of like, hey, you have to get done up, you have to have a certain look, you have to move a certain way to be rewarded, right? And I think that's okay, right? Like it's just like the frame that in the correct way, because there are a lot of aspects of both of those divisions that, well, I guess what it was meant to be more of kind of like that pageant-esque, but obviously like what we're talking about, like there have been moments where it's turned a little bit more towards, all right, the blending of the lines are getting a little bit more challenging to discern. So that's something that I do think that it is worth talking about just in terms of like divisions. But with competing in any sport, I think it's important to talk about like there is a massive psychological component, but that doesn't necessarily mean mental health, right?
Right.
Like psychology of competition is its own extremely broad topic here, and that would be a freaking podcast series on its own. But I do think it's really important to understand how those things differ, right? Like psychologically, you can be a very resilient person while also having mental health issues that hold you back in various ways, right? And I don't think that those two things are necessarily linearly correlated, and they get confused a lot, right? You can also be psychologically a very weak person while having no mental health issues, right? Like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are psychologically weak. Like that is not what I'm saying, right? So like if you have a poor relationship with food and you're someone who cannot resist your cravings, that doesn't make you a psychologically weak person. Like there are differences there, right? And same thing if you are someone who deals with body dysmorphia, like that doesn't make you psychologically weak. There are massive differences there, right? If you are psychologically weak if you lose and then you never compete again because you can't take the pressure of potential failure. That is a psychologically weak person. You're psychologically weak if you can't train hard enough or push yourself hard enough to be able to get to that point, right? Or to be able to get on stage. If you cannot sustain that, like you are, that is much closer to being psychologically weak, right? Or if you're someone who gets intimidated at the prospect of competition, that is being more weak psychologically. Those are very different than someone who deals with issues with mental health. And I think that is, again, that's a very important distinction to make. But as we continue to kind of like get further into this, I want to venture a little bit away from the fitness component of what we're talking about here and get more into like the broad, like, all right, like what are the things that we notice here? What are some of the things that we've experienced with this? And I think that will kind of carry the conversation a little bit further. So you can obviously start because I think that, you have some good things to say about this. And I would probably just like kind of pick up the pace with my rants.
For sure. No, and to your point, like you said, I believe that there's definitely a distinction that needs to be made between the fortuitousness, right? Like how strong someone is mentally versus someone actually having what you would consider something they specifically struggle with, right? Okay, it's like, weakness lends itself to like when things get hard, you don't want to show up, right? Like that's just kind of how it goes. And like there are people that are out there. There are even people who are strong mostly who have weaknesses in certain realms or certain just atmospheres, right? So definitely glad you made that distinction. As far as like
I was say another good example of like psychological weakness is someone who like can't hit the clutch free throws. You know what I mean? Like it's more performance based, right? So that's what I would consider to be more like sport specific psychological weakness.
Yeah.
This is something that is almost like brain chemistry based, right? Like there's certain things that can't really rectify psychological weakness like that. And it's not necessarily ingrained either. That's such a tricky fucking subject, man.
It was like overlap, right? Because you have things that are like chemically like, hey, like your brain is more predispositioned to do X, to think Y. But then you also have like the nature versus nurture. It's like you can curate a psychologically weak child. Like you can literally raise a person to be psychologically weak. You can also raise the person to have should say you can encourage certain mental struggles. We can start like definitely some depressive episodes can be encouraged, right? Like body dysmorphia can be encouraged. Like depending on the home you grow up in, it's definitely it's tough distinction. It definitely is.
Yeah, something. Oh, okay. So something like self-esteem, self-worth, self-confidence, body dysmorphia, like that is very, very nurture, right? Like that is very environmental. If you grow up and your parents consistently demean you and talk down to you, and your mom is like, fuck, I have to buy you another pair of pants because you can't fucking fit into the old ones. Jesus Christ. Like if you're getting stuff like that,
yeah,
dude, that is, yeah, of course, that is gonna fuck with you, man. And at the same time, like, if you're someone who, whenever you're a child, you've been put in the pressure or in the position of having pressure on you consistently, then all of a sudden, like, those clutch free throws aren't that big of a deal whenever you have to figure out how your family is going to eat next month, right? Like there are different levels of pressure, but we talked about this before, like the earlier that you're subjected to pressure in life, the better off you're going to be. Obviously, if that pressure can be overcome. Like, there are certain types of pressure that can result in very negative outcomes. Again, if you are someone who was like nervous or insecure about shelter or food, like, yeah, you could be the type of person that goes out and works harder. You could also be the type of person that steals, right? So there are potential negative outcomes of these things, but again, it's like the nature versus nurture being like wow, I can't say nature versus nurture. That can go in so many different directions. That's a super fucking complex topic, but no, like, again, I'm going to ask you this question, right? And I think that's kind of where I want to go with this. So, like, for you, what are some of the things that you've dealt with in terms of like your own mental health? And that's again a really, really broad question, and you don't have to go into super specifics in terms of like events or names or any of that stuff. But I do think that it would kind of humanize what we're talking about a little bit more.
For sure. No, and that's actually where I was going to go. So perfect. Because I think that there is the heavy, it's not talked about enough. I think how much people, I as a man definitely have talked to other men, but I don't think that this is lost on either gender, either sex. Um, the fact that, or anyone, I should say, just to blanketly say anyone, lost on anyone, the idea that what I do, what I provide, what I accomplish is who I am and what I am worth to the people in the society around. So obviously in the realm of bodybuilding and fitness, that's very, very apparent, right? Like you're only as good as the medals you get, the championships you win, the points you score. But I definitely felt that very strongly as a kid. It's one of those things where like you talk about like just like reflecting. And I would be hard pressed to meet a person. I think that while living their childhood, knew their childhood was like trauma ridden or like it was tough. I think that as a kid, you just kind of think like this is just how it is, right? As you get older, you start looking at maybe how your friends are living and going, oh, that seems like it's easier than what I got going on over here. But I think as a kid, like you don't really think about shit being that bad. Like it was life, you know? It wasn't until like I was writing like a year or so ago that I started to remember um probably from the time I was like, I don't know, 6 or 7 to the time I was like 10. Whenever my parents would get upset with me or whenever I felt like I was falling short, I would go to my room and I would open hand, kind of like open fistish, hit myself in the face, like hard. And it was it's a super interesting thing to think about, like just a kid being that angry at whatever, right? And so going back and thinking about it, I think I told my grandmother about it. She's the only one to do. Um, and a lot of it came from just like the idea of like, I'm making everyone's life around me hard because I'm not showing up the way I need to show up. I'm not as good as I need to be. Especially when it came down to like my relationship with my dad. He just for blanket statement had a lot of things going on. He had a lot of things he was taking care of, he was doing. Today, my dad and I have a very, very open and cool relationship where we can talk about a lot of this stuff. But back then, like he wasn't around. And I thought that if I was better in school, if I was the best in school, if I was the best on the field, if I was the best on the court, he would, show up. The better I got, whether there was like a good motive to get better or not, good being in quotations, he still didn't show up, right? He still found other things to do, other ways to occupy himself. Um, so it taught me a very, very valuable lesson that I wasn't able to learn until looking back on it. But it also taught me to like depend on myself, right? It taught me how to kind of grow and learn how to find the things I was looking for in other people and myself, right or wrong. And I think it's a very, very valuable lesson that you have to learn. And so I had many bouts. It's funny, like ending relationships, whether it was my doing only, it was a mutual doing, like ending relationships, losing friends, like every time I felt like a little like tinge of that little 6 to 10-year-old kid who would hit himself when he felt like the people around him didn't see him the way he wanted them to see him because of whatever, right? And so I think that that's probably like my biggest like reoccurring thing is not attaching what I can do for someone, how I show up for someone, or what I have accomplished, right? Like look at me and look at me on Instagram or look at me on the court or on the field or look how jacked I am or look how smart I am and the big words I can use. Like trying to say, hey, I do this shit for me. I care about like bettering myself because I want to be the best variation of me I can be when it's all over. I want to contribute the most I can to the collective consciousness when finally, it's a wrap. Um, and not letting that like, oh, but I do want people to see me a certain way. I want people to like me. I want people to revere me, and I think it's a normal thing as a person to want. It's just not letting it control your narrative, not letting it take hold and make you do things that you might not otherwise do. I think that's a big piece for a lot of people.
uh I have my own answer to this question, but do you think that seeking validation from someone in your childhood, whether it's a parent, whether it's a sibling, whether it's a mentor, a teacher, do you think that that constant seek search for approval is a good thing or a bad thing in total? Like, do you think that that was a good thing for you, or do you wish that you would have never had to go through that?
I'm gonna say for me, and I'm gonna say for, and I'll probably get in trouble for this, maybe, who knows, for my future kids, for people who I think interact with me in the future. I expect things of people. I do. And I want them to try to live up to those. But it's not because of me. It's not for me. And I think that's the thing that as a kid, I try to wrap my head around. And of course, your parents tell you, like, when they want you to do well in school or whatever, it's for you. This is for you. This is your future. This is your future. Even if they are pushing you in a direction that you do not want to go. So I guess to answer your question shortly, I would say yes. I think it was good for me. I'm glad I went through that. I think there's several studies obviously that are coming out that say the right amount of trauma like builds a level of resilience that usually leads to high achievers, people who do really, really cool things, or have really, really like exponential impacts. And I think that's where I'm kind of coming into, right? I'm getting messages from people, especially when I was posting a bit more and I want to get back into just my writing and sharing. I had a guy message me. We both know him, but he messaged me the other day. And it was just crazy. He goes, "Hey man, I had a dream about you," which is like already nuts to start off. I was just like, all right. And he's like, "I had a dream that you were having a really, really large impact on a lot of lives, even more so than what you're doing. So like just whatever you're doing right now, I hope this like motivates you to keep going." Pretty much it. Have a good day, bro. I was like, if like not from a person who knows me really well, person I've had like maybe a dozen interactions with, and most of them being in passing at a festival or whatever, no real deep conversations. And I just like sat there and my eyes are watering up, and I'm just like, because that's what I do want. It's not, and I think I've transcended that space of like wanting to be liked versus really wanting to feel like my existence has mattered. Really feeling like, when I leave this place, like I have left a very positive mark. The world is a better place having had me exist in it. And I don't think it comes from a pride or anything like that so much as I just really I like helping people. It makes me feel really good to know that the world is better or someone's life is better having talked to me or had an experience with me. So I think that actually is the grown-up version of that little kid who's trying to seek approval from his mom, from his dad, who just wants them to be proud because it's the pride you see in them that makes you feel good based on something you did. And so I've taken that and I feel like kind of morphed it into something that is positive and also doesn't eat away at me when I don't get it, right? I think that that's the key piece is like if you do sit there and you write this super, super hard open piece, a poem, a story or whatever, and it gets 4 likes and no one says, "Yeah, me too, bro, share, da, 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 whatever," and no one calls you, no one asks you to talk about it, does that undo you, right? Does that completely unravel you? Because if so, then I think there's probably more work to be done. You don't want to hinge everything on that, but I do think there's something special in being able to share and feel like what you're sharing is being received in a certain way. And I think that that is just the grown-up version of seeking that approval.
I think it ultimately comes down to like what motivates you, right? Especially whenever we're talking about like people who are perpetual validation seekers, or they're always looking for other people to show them some kind of like, status achievement, or they want the compliments, or they need showered, right? Like they need all of that like positive energy towards them to be reminded that they are, they're worth it. They matter. Like they're important. It's like all of those things, right? I think that they're like everyone has to have something that is driving them. Absolutely. Everyone needs something, right? Because if there's nothing that drives you and you don't know what drives you, then what do you like? What do you do? Where do you go? Like, I mean, you just wake up every day and like do the same bullshit every single day. Like there's that's circular. There's nothing happening there, right? So everyone needs some driving factor that is like their internal motivation, right? Their intrinsic motivation. I think that some people do get that from a shitty childhood. Like some people get and become motivated and they become high achievers because their childhood was so fucking bad for whatever reason, for various reasons, and that it molded them into be that person. And that, I don't think that's good, but it's reality, right? Like some of like what we were talking about before, like some of the highest achievers have been kind of products of like shitty childhoods,
Yeah.
or shitty environments, or they were pushed to be that way because of character flaws and personality flaws in them, right? Like Steve Jobs is a good example. Like Steve Jobs was a huge asshole, right? A huge asshole. And he was really challenging to be around. He was challenging to work for, but he was obviously a high achiever. Like, what am I thinking about? Fucking Musk, dude. Jesus Christ. I don't know why my brain is like not clicking right now, but Musk like had a really insane childhood, bad childhood. His dad is super fucked up, like incredible narcissist. It's insane. And yeah, like you can say whatever you want about like Elon and like how he is. And yeah, dude, he's definitely a narcissist as well. But like you have to understand like where that came from, like why he is the way that he is. And like that doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it okay. That doesn't absolve him of the issues that he has. But it does give it more context so you understand that person a little bit more.
Yeah.
And for me, I probably won't go into like too much of my own like mental health shit, but like I don't know, just for as like a high level for me, right? Like I feel like I've always kind of known that I feel like everyone says this, but like I feel like I've always kind of known that like there was something a little bit off with me. Like even whenever I was like younger, I was like, man, I don't know, shit just doesn't affect me the same way that it seems to affect other people. Like whether it was like empathetically or emotionally, I was like, I don't really feel the same way, right? We've talked about this before. I feel like I'm often like rational to a fault, like to the point that it becomes somewhat detrimental for my ability to make decisions because I don't account for a lot of people's emotions. But I mean, I had a weird childhood, and like I'm not gonna go into like too much depth there because it's that would take a long time. But I had a really weird and insecure childhood, and it went through periods of like extreme rigid authority and also extreme laxity and like no oversight and just kind of do whatever you want. And I don't think that was good for me as a child, as like a teenager to those pendulum swings. Somehow I made it out and I'm like fucking not dead and I'm not arrested, and that's okay and that's good. But at the same time, I do think that like, a lot of the things that I dealt with whenever I was a kid that kind of molded it into me, or molded me to be the adult that I became. And with that, like I was not a good person for a long time. Like I had a lot of serious flaws and a lot of serious issues within who I was, like fundamentally who I was. And for the longest time, I basically just excused those problems and assumed that it was just the way that I was. It was like, well, I can't change it. It's just who I am, And like I tried to use a lot of those things as an excuse. And then as I got older, I also started to kind of deal with like mood swings a little bit more. And I guess like the best way I can describe mood swings is like periods of like mania and like depression, right? Like not clinical depression, to the point where I need to be like institutionalized, but like kind of paralyzing depression and anxiety, right? So will go through these periods where I go up and down pretty violently, and I've gotten a lot better at managing that stuff because I'm more aware of it and I can kind of sense it, and I feel what's going on inside of me in the moment. Whereas before I just kind of rode with it and it wasn't something that I even gave credit to. But before I used a lot of that stuff as an excuse for acting the way that I was acting, which was bad. I was acting like a piece of shit. I was making really poor decisions, and I was just, like I said, I was overall just a bad person. And I do like to think that I have improved in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of the improvement has come from just general self-awareness, and like also a resistance for me to use these things as excuses for how I am and how I will be in the future. And that to me is ultimately the the biggest gripe I have with mental health in general is that it's too often, I think, used as an excuse for people behaving or acting or saying things that are problematic, and it absolves responsibility to improve in any capacity, because you say, oh, well, like I can't work, I can't do this because I have depression, or I can't do this because I have anxiety, or I did that because of my childhood trauma. It's like, that's not okay. Like that isn't automatically absolving you of the responsibility that you have as a member of society to act a certain way, right? And everyone deals with their own shit, and everyone also has the responsibility to manage their own shit.
Yeah.
And just because you have depression, or just because you are bipolar, or just because you have some specific childhood trauma, like that does not mean that as an adult, everyone else must bear the burden of that responsibility while you try to figure your shit out, right?
Right.
I am super empathetic of people that deal with shit, right? Because I have dealt with shit, and it's not fun going through that stuff, right? But at the same time, like I said, I do think that it is important to frame this in a way that is understanding. It's empathetic, it's sympathetic, it's making things okay to talk about, and it's making it okay to bring these things up whenever you are struggling with something. I think that is probably the biggest point. But at the same time, not using it, or not using these things as crutches or excuses.
Yeah.
And I feel like, and we've talked about this before, like, positive movements pushing so hard in one direction that they slowly kind of become negatives. And one thing I've noticed with mental health discussions is that at this point, it almost feels like if you don't talk about your mental health, like you're not part of the cool kids club. Like if you're normal, like that's almost seen as a bad thing to say, like, oh, I don't have depression, I don't deal with anxiety, like I feel okay, I'm happy, I'm generally happy. Like, that's almost seen as like a negative thing, where it's like, oh fuck, like look at this guy, like he can't even understand, he doesn't understand. It's like, oh, that seems kind of wrong, right? That seems wrong to demonize someone, or like look at them differently because they don't have mental health issues.
Right.
But like I said, I also feel like there's like a push towards claiming everything is a mental health problem, or a mental health crisis as well. So like, just because you're anxious about something doesn't mean that you have mental health issues, right? Just because you're sad doesn't mean that you have depression. Like these are also there. It's very important to distinguish between a lot of this stuff, right? People that suffer from clinical depression are in a very different state than someone who woke up feeling sad because it's cloudy outside and like their girlfriend dumped them. Like,
Yeah.
very, very different things. And I'm not sure that people fully appreciate the severity, or like the gap in the spectrum of emotions and emotional capability. Because if you're someone who's dealt with depression, it's not just sadness, right? If you're someone who's dealt with mania, it's not just energy.
Right.
There
Yeah.
is a qualitative gap in these things.
There's definitely, yes. And I think it's key. It's funny, and I don't know if this is just my upbringing or what. I mean, growing up, if there's any person of color that is listening to this, I guarantee that the likelihood of them agreeing this is pretty high. You couldn't say you were depressed in my house, right? You say you're depressed. My mom would be like, go depress them dishes, bro. Like, like it is one of those things where, quite frankly, like it was described to us, like that's just white people looking for a reason to complain, right? This is why their lives are bad.
Okay.
Which is one of those, which is one of those things where it's just like, I know where it comes from. It comes from, I understand the rigidity and the sometimes like marginally weird context in which I was brought up and the harshness sometimes like my dad or my aunt or grandma, because they prepared me for a relatively harsh world in certain aspects, right? Like, okay, listen, like you don't have the opportunity to, be a dick here or fuck off here or whatever, because there will be opportunities that you will lose based on just what you look like. So I'm going to treat you pretty much like the world's going to treat you. And so I think there's definitely a harshness that kind of came immediately. And growing up, it's only reflecting on, it's not like a recession. It's reflecting on moments in life that I realized like that was a depressive bout. And I almost never say I was depressed. I say, I had a depressive episode. I had several months where I didn't want to get up and I didn't want to do anything. I wanted to close the blinds and I wanted to vanish from this world. I would rather not exist. And I would call that like, that's a depressive episode. I wouldn't say that I've ever struggled with like chronic depression. I have friends who have. And I don't know if that comes from there's also a very strong like anti-victim mentality, probably too strong and probably a little too rational and logical, pretty much saying that everything that's ever happened to you is within your control. And if something is minorly out of your control, how you respond to it is 100% in your control. So stop blaming other people in the world for the way your life is.
Yeah, and that's something we can add more context to, because I definitely agree with you though. Yeah.
Which I was going to bring me to, where do you think you're recognized relatively early? Because I didn't recognize this in myself until later on in life, when people started to tell me that I was like callous or cold, or I didn't have a heart, or I was an asshole. Like that lack of empathy. Like, where do you think that's something that was just kind of naturally always there? Do you think it was through experience? Like, where do you think that was fostered within you?
I mean, I'm not, this is going to sound so shitty, but it's fine. It's fine. Like, we have a better relationship now. I think that part of it comes from whenever I was growing up, my mom was just a very selfish person. And she made decisions that kind of, put me in a really, really bad spot as like a young kid. And I feel like that hardened me really early. Like I developed just a shell around me. And I mean, this, we've had these conversations. Like, it's really hard for me to open up to people. It's really hard for me to let people in. And whenever someone breaks my trust, like, they're like, for me, they're done. Like, it's like never again, right? It's like, in my mind, it's very much like, well, you should have known, you fucking idiot. Like, why would you ever allow someone to get that close to you, right? So I think part of it is just being fucking disappointed as a child so often, right? Like, eventually you just kind of become callous and you kind of have a negative worldview, and you kind of just look at people as more inherently bad. And it's funny because I think as I've gotten older, I've become more optimistic. But whenever I was younger, I was definitely extremely pessimistic, and I was extremely pessimistic about people and human nature. So I think that just created a person who was more selfish and looked out for himself,
Yeah.
or others, and didn't take the time to calculate the effect of his decisions and actions on other people around him. And I mean, look, we know where that got me. Like, that got me nowhere good.
Right.
But at the same time, I do think that all of the things that happened to me, the way that they happened to me, the time that they happened to me, was good. Like, that was what I needed, because in a lot of ways, I think that kind of like softened the exterior on me and made me less of a selfish person, because I saw the ways that, like, it wasn't even seeing, it was about like experiencing the ways that my decisions and my actions impacted the people that I really cared about. And I do think that had like really profound effect on me. And also just becoming older and being able to understand a little bit better, like, the decisions that like my parents made whenever I was young, and also just coming around to the fact that I think eventually everyone starts to just realize that, like, their parents weren't these godlike figures. Like, they were just humans that were trying to make the best decisions, but didn't know what the fuck they were doing either.
Right.
And as I've gotten older, I think that I've been able to compartmentalize those things a lot better as like, well, it's not a you thing, it's just a human thing. And like everyone makes bad decisions and everyone to a certain degree is selfish and all of these things. But yeah, I would say that a lot of that kind of developed early on, just as a product of necessity. Like I could not have been soft growing up the way that I did.
I think
So
that's the thing they talk about, like survival mode, right? Is the new, like the new term on Instagram and a lot of media. I think there's merit to it. I think there's merit to the fact that, like you said, like people even talk about how much I joke, right? Like I remember first meeting you and trying to get you to make fun of me back, like just say something back, because I would always just poke at you and you'd be like, you didn't say anything. Socially awkward motherfucker. No. But it's just one of those things where like I grew up, that's what we did. And I always joke when people say something like, there are very few things you could say to me that would turn me like angry or hurt my feelings, because I'm like, dude, I promise you, the person that I looked up to, wanted to be like, hurt my feelings way more than any of you ever will. Like, and it was just because that's just who he was. And not because he wanted to hurt me. He wasn't trying to beat his son down. It's one of those things where like that's how he connected. That's how he communicated when he was upset or happy or irritated or frustrated, was an immediate jab, which did a lot for me trying to always prove myself to him. But it did help hurt my self-confidence. I struggled to look people in the eye. I struggled to speak slowly sometimes, because I feel like if I don't say it fast enough, people will stop listening, or they'll tell me to shut up, or they'll cut me off, or whatever. And so like trying to breathe through talking and being a bit more confident and being able to look somebody in the eyes, like these are all things that I used to work on. Like I would be in the mirror, like talking to myself or talking to like whatever in my room, trying to overcome those things. But like you said, you go through enough and it's almost like you had to be hard. Like you had to stiffen up a little bit. Otherwise, like there was not much place for you to survive, whether it was in society with the kids you were around or at home with your parents. And like you said, allowing room for them to be human. Like every person, especially women, when they meet my dad, they go, oh, he's just like, because they see the broken promises. They see the, hey man, I'm gonna be, and he doesn't show up. I'm like, dude, it's been that way since I was a kid. I've sat in a window at my mom's house waiting for him to show up, to get a call hours after you're supposed to be there that he's like, right? And like, that shit like sucks. Like you said, it breaks trust. And the thing is, like, you're like a puppy then. Like you never stop waiting in the window. You keep going to the window every time that weekend comes, right? And it's weird because you don't hold any resentment. You don't sit there and hate that person, but you do, like, there's this like slow brew of like you said, a kind of lack of empathy where like I got older. It wasn't that I didn't understand that people got upset about things or things hurt people's feelings, but I struggled to sit there and listen to someone vent and go, that's so bad. I'm like, okay, so what are we gonna do about it? Like, what's the next step? And I've been accused of being callous or hard because I don't sit in that moment, because I was never really allowed to. But like you said, it's definitely one of those things that you just kind of develop. But on the same note, as we grow and understand, like, I did become selfish. I started seeking validation in other unhealthy ways, right? Like I've broken like engagements off. I've broken trust in relationships. I've sat there, and to your point earlier, I kind of wanted to mention, like, we've obviously talked at length about our misadventures, growing up and stuff like that. And I think it's important for me, at least to you as like your brother, as your best friend, like be careful calling yourself the bad person. Right? I'm very keen on this, because I think that you were a person who was doing what he could and what he needed to do to make sure he made it to the next day, right? Like, and without a lot of those things, even if they did manifest in like a negative way for people around you, sometimes you strip a lot of that away and you end up with a person who hurts themselves or kills themselves or decides to completely dissociate from society, because they've removed that shell. They removed the thing that is like pointy and hurting people around them, but it's also the thing that's making them feel the most safe to be able to operate. Once you know better, trying to be better and working on it every single day, I think is the most important piece. But I mean, I would encourage anyone listening, like, it's one thing to say that you've grown and you were making poor decisions and, maybe you weren't as, you know, uh, progressed, elevated, mindful, aware as you'd like to be. And now you are working towards that. But it hurts my feelings hearing you call yourself a bad person, because then I with myself, I'm like, dude, I wasn't better. But I'd like to believe that I was just learning and working.
Well, I think it's relative, right? Like I haven't killed anybody, but I've done bad things, right? And okay, so I do agree with you, right? So like I think that there is a difference between someone who does bad things and a bad person. And I did bad things. And I think that the way that I look at myself from the past is that this was a person who was doing bad things who was not learning from the bad things doing. And in a lot of ways, I think that that does start to make you a bad person. Like you are only as good as your track record.
Right.
And if you do a lot of bad things, like it's hard to call you a bad or a good person, right? Like I I mean, I'm not going to call Jeffrey Dahmer a good person just because, you know, he converted to Christianity at the very end, right? Like, I mean, bro, yeah, you got a moral debt you got to pay, bro. Long time, you know? So it's like, I think that for myself, you know, I do appreciate the distinction. I will say, you know, that I did incur a lot of moral debt on the things that I did before, right? So I think now I'm trying to kind of like slowly pay that back and get my shit together and get on like a better track. And I definitely feel like I have in a lot of ways. And there's still a lot of ways that I feel like I can continue to do better. But you know, that's I guess how it should be, right? And I think for me, even that, or like even that recognition is a good sign for me. The fact that like, hey, I'm doing better, but I can still do better than what I'm doing currently. And like I need to continue to try and do better. Otherwise, like, you know, I might fall back into old patterns or I might relapse and like continue to do some of the old shit because you know Mario and I had these conversations before, and for anyone who's listening who doesn't know, Mario is like one of our close friends who's also dealt with some of this stuff as well. And you know it feels very much like anyone who has made significant life changes, it always feels like you're kind of running from something. It feels like you're just trying to stay a little bit ahead of that shadow that is that's trying to catch up with you. And like for me, it definitely feels like that in a lot of ways, right? Like I think that my self-awareness at this point is what prevents me from doing a lot of the things that I've done before and making the same mistakes. But I'm not going to say that I'm a completely different person because those skeletons are still in my closet, you know, like, and I have overflowing closets, man. Like there's a lot going on there. And for me, I think it's just one of those things where it's like every day I try and just kind of tend to that, you know, I try and pay attention to where I'm at, how I'm feeling. I try and like check in with myself a little bit. And as much as I make fun of people for a lot of this stupid bullshit, like woo woo stuff, but it is true, you know, like there is an aspect of like, hey, just like pay attention to how you're feeling, pay attention to the things that are going on around you, but also in your head, you know, like if you're noticing a pattern of behavior, or if you're noticing that there's an outcome in your life that feels like it's attached to you and you can't get away from it, that's probably a sign of something that you need to do differently. Not everyone else needs to do differently, right? Like for myself, we've talked about this at length, but I am pretty prone to like these like bouts of paranoia. And I think it comes with like manic episodes, but like for me, I can pretty easily switch into this mindset of like everyone is against me. And it can kind of come out of nowhere, but a lot of times what precedes that is like something big and bad happening, right? Like a profoundly negative experience, whether it's work or life, something big happening, and then kind of like what I was talking about before is like my trust in something has been shattered. And then that's almost like this realization or this wake up call in my head was like, oh, fuck, that's why you don't trust anyone. So then that makes me paranoid about everything, even the people that have never given me a reason for me to not trust them. Right. So I know that I'm extremely prone to thinking in that way. But I feel like as I've gotten older and as I've kind of worked through some of those things, I can check in with myself in the moment and become aware that I am acting or I'm thinking or I'm feeling those things. And then it becomes a lot easier for me to be like, why the fuck am I doing this? Like, why am I acting like this? Why am I thinking this? Like, why do I feel like Chris is against me? Like, Chris has never given me a reason ever to question his loyalty to me as a friend. Why do I feel like that right now? And again, like for me, the hyper rationality I think can come back out as a benefit whenever I question the illogical and irrational emotions that I'm experiencing. And I can almost like step out of my body for a moment and be like, why the fuck are you thinking this? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And then that can kind of snap me out of it for long enough to where I can get back on track. Because for me, I just need to sidestep that. I need to break that pattern for a moment. And then once I can get out of it, I can get back on track. But if I just kind of settle in and don't address it, then all of a sudden it's like complete derailment. And I'm just like fucking off.
Yeah. No, it's hard to live in the gray. I mean, I think that, so yours is, obviously we talked about like the paranoia and like manic like slips, with the voids that you can kind of slip into and how detrimental heck can be. I've experienced those in some degree. Mine probably come more in a guy I admitted by definition, I guess, like anxious attachment style, right? And I'm sure that comes from a level of like fear of abandonment that I've experienced. And I think I should say this really quick because I want to say it earlier. Like, my dad will probably listen to this. He actually likes listening to the podcast a lot. My dad's awesome. Like, he's grown so much, and as a parent goes, like being able to sit there and talk to my dad about like sex, drugs, relationships, growing, like all the different things that we battle with. And I think that you're in most traditional spaces, your dad is supposed to be this guy that kind of walks you through things, but instead we kind of get to walk hand in hand together through conversations. We learn things from each other. Obviously, him having way more experience, and me trying to experience and learn things about myself earlier, things that he was not encouraged to learn. I mean, my dad was 19 when he had me, right? So like, put myself into like a teenage body with a kid, and it's like, okay. And then also, I think my dad was absent. His dad was not around, right? Like, his dad was like vapor, ghost, an idea. So, like you said, lending them like, okay, like, yeah, I'm not going to sit there and say like absolve you of the things you did, but also I understand that you were doing the best with what you had. You gave me a lot because you didn't have a lot to give. So proportionally, like, you gave me a lot, So I will say that I think for me, there was this like, and always is, and it's hard to turn off sometimes. It's like looming, they're mad at me. Like, there's something like my brain caches all of these, the way Bryce blinks, the way that Emily smiles, the way that Mackenzie says this, all the people who are most important to me. And it's funny because I don't give a fuck what most people think. If I can't name you, I don't give a shit what you think, bro. If I can't call you, I don't give a fuck what your thoughts are on me. But the people who do matter the world to me, like, if I feel like I'm off, it shatters me. Like, I cannot focus on anything else. And it's not even because they've said anything to me. If anything, that's the limbo that like probably fucks me up the most. And that gray is being like, okay, well, Bryce normally sends me this shit, or he normally says that, or Emily normally does this, or whatever. And now my brain can't stop running scenarios of what the fuck I did and what's going on here. Which I think, to your point you kind of made earlier, I think a lot of the reasons why I made decisions that I made that were selfish, that hurt people, whether it was in a relationship or friendships or whatever, it wasn't because I wanted to hurt somebody. And I think that's a very important distinction. And that's why I'm careful about the word like bad. It was a bad decision. You're not the worst of those decisions. It was a assumption that this person's going to let you down anyway. This person's probably going to leave you anyway because you're not good enough, and they're going to find someone better, and they're going to do this and they're going to do that. So the minute you get attached to them, they're going to bounce anyway. So you might as well take care of yourself. You might as well just live up to the expectation they have of you anyway. And like, obviously led me to some like pretty like dark and bad places, hurt a lot of people, and it's not where you want to be. And like you said though, like the awareness aspect is huge. And you kind of talked about, like, we both talked about it. We make fun of this topic actually a lot. As deep as we go in a very real tone, we also go as deep into making fun of some of the shit that we see, because there is a level, like I said, of like that victim mentality where now it's like I can assign the negative parts of me these things that you now have to feel bad for and give me a pass for. Like, I have high anxiety, so I'm sorry, I will not have this difficult conversation with you. I struggle with manic bouts of like bipolar episodes. So if I'm mean to you and I say sorry, you just have to say it's okay.
Yeah.
Like those are things that I think we're starting to push ourselves into, and it's funny because twofold to me, this really pisses me off. Like it makes me very like irrationally angry. One, I think it does a lot of discredit to I could say like the forerunners of the mental health space, the people who have really been going through a lot of shit in new age before new age recognition was there, right? The people who struggled with depressive bouts and manic episodes who were just told to just smile, just be happy, just go for a walk. Like they didn't have that attention that probably should have been given to what they were struggling with. And they made it to the other side through their own coping mechanisms, their own realizations, their own studies and awareness. And then also on a very base level, as a person who has a huge soft spot for people who like are very different, especially in the way of like mental ability, right? It's people who struggle with, not struggle, I should say, people who have autism, people who have Down syndrome, people who literally, hey, listen, you cannot do this with this person because it will send them here, it will send them there. And so growing up, I spent a lot of time with people like this who like in sports and just like volunteering and stuff like that. And I hope to eventually open up a P2 wing where that's who I work with. Like I would love to work in that space. Um, when I hear someone go, I can't because I have anxiety. I can't because this. Like, no, I can't hug Kyle because it makes him feel a crazy amount of overstimulation and it sends him into a tizzy. And now he's like completely like derailed the rest of the day. That's a can't, right? That is someone who literally cannot. When you say that about another person, when like you and I have conversations about another person and we go, well, that's just them. It's like, in my mind, that's what that sounds like. You're now saying that this person and their lack of awareness is kin to autism. They just cannot overcome this, even though they know it's present. And that to me, it just gives me such a nasty ick feeling. It makes me mad at that person. It makes me mad at the situation. And it makes me mad at this society that is like bubble wrapped these people and given them this crux or this, excuse to just say, I can be what I want to be. And then you have to just say, like, they're a good person. We just know that they struggle with. They're a good person, but and now all your sins get washed away. It's not that way, bro.
You saw the last season of Succession, yeah? You know the part where Logan walks in and he's like talking shit to all the kids and he's like, you are not serious people. He's just like screaming at him, like, you're not serious people. Bro, like, that's exactly how I feel with a lot of this stuff, right? Where, it's like, again, you get your feelings hurt, so you have to take a week off of work because, like, mental health week. Like, okay, so that's another thing, right? Like the fact that mental health time off exists is a sign, right? Like it's like, is mental health or are mental health issues pervasive enough throughout society? Severe mental health issues, again, not anxiety, not sadness, not I had a bad day, but like clinical depression, paralyzing anxiety, like what you said, the cannots, I cannot do this. Right. That really pervasive enough to the point where every company needs to give all of their employees mental health time off, right? Maybe you could, I would, you can make an argument, right? Like I'll listen to the argument. My assumption here is probably not, okay? That's my assumption. My assumption also is that this is going to be abused.
Yeah.
And I think that anytime that so this is my thing too. Anytime people can find clout or the potential of clout in anything, they will take advantage of it. What we've talked about with certain movements, right? Like we had like the BLM stuff where we talked about that, where movement as an idea, good. Movement in practice, because it picked up a lot of bad actors, not so good in execution, right? It disillusioned a lot of people that were potentially in the middle that they could have swayed with the moral grounds of the movement, but the way that it was executed really pushed a lot of people to the other side. And I think that we're kind of seeing this with mental health as well, where it's like, okay, we have this movement, this awareness movement, which is great. We like that is awesome. We want that. We don't want something like this to be stigmatized or tabooed. That is bad, because this needs to be talked about. The only way that something like mental health issues can be rectified is through talking about it, right? Like it need, or at least maybe not rectified, but at least managed,
Yeah.
right? That's a better way. Like that is one way of managing some of these things. But whenever everyone has mental health issues, all of a sudden the people that truly need the help are thrown in the same bucket as people who are sad today. And it's like, that is not how these things are supposed to work. And one thing that I've noticed is like kind of what I mentioned before, where it feels like you're almost like an outcast if you don't say that you have mental health issues these days, which is like, that's its own fucking thing. But I definitely feel like it's a clout thing, which blows my mind that people have attached themselves to something like this to say, oh yeah, like this is my way that I want to get attention.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't surprise me, but it is kind of mind blowing. And I always have to kind of like look at what's going on, right? It's like, yes, everyone deals with shit. Everyone has their own relative stressors in life. No one's childhood was perfect, right? But there also has to be something that is said about the severity of problems that people deal with and like the objective reality of the severity of those problems. Yes, you can have trauma because your mom worked late every night and she, got home at 7 instead of 4 p.m. You can also have trauma because your dad raped you. To me, those aren't the same childhood traumas. And no matter how you explain that or try and equalize those as saying, well, everything is trauma or anything can be a trauma, for me, it's like, no, like there are real boundaries here, and like severity and magnitude, like those are real things that you need to actually take into account whenever we're discussing some of these things. And for me, it just always comes back to something what you said earlier, like the victim mentality, right? Like playing the victim. And people that have true mental health issues, that are aware of them, that battle them, that try to manage them, they don't use it as an excuse. That's the thing.
No, it's fair. Like if you're not to cut you off, but to me, if you're the first to call out what it is you struggle with, it's almost an immediate devaluation in my head. I'm like, okay, wait a second. Like you're wearing this right here, as opposed to like, kind of like, and I'm not saying like mine is better, but like, I think that if you are depressed, more people than not that I've talked to have struggled with chronic depression did not know that they were depressed. Like they were so focused on trying to just be better and do the things. They didn't know what was wrong with them, quote unquote. And so if someone comes out and goes, yeah, I'm this, I just struggle with this, I'm just like, I immediately go, like, and so, right or wrong, I think that there is something to be said for, like you said, everyone trying to wear this badge for a cloud of like, this is what I struggle with, listen to me, look at me. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. It's just, I think that what makes it difficult is that it's hard to filter the true severe cases that need to be addressed. Like this person is so far along that if we do not intervene, then they might do something bad. Or, like they have the finger on the self-destruct button of their life right now because of their internal crises that are going on.
Right.
That is different again than someone who is having a Molly come down after a festival and they're sad, right? Like, man, like there are degrees to this. And I don't think that necessarily should discount people's feelings, but I will say this: feelings are real, but not all feelings are valid. And this is something that is hard for me because I've gone back and forth on like the whole validity versus reality thing, right? Everything is real. Like if you're feeling jealous or you're feeling hurt or you're feeling sad or whatever, like that is real. But how is that valid? Like do those feelings match the source of those feelings or whatever caused those feelings to be the effect? And sometimes the answer is no. sometimes those feelings aren't valid. And I think that that's something that really needs to be addressed and talked about as well, because certain people just cannot process their fucking emotions. But that also is not a mental health issue. That is a maturity issue.
Yes.
You learn how to process your emotions better. And that to me is something that, like, I think that these things get pushed so far to the extremes of, oh, I'm feeling this way, so I can't do this today. I'm feeling this way, so I acted this way. I'm feeling this way, so like I said this, but I didn't really mean it because I was just feeling that way. But my feelings were valid though. But what I said wasn't valid because I was feeling that way. It's like, no, you can't have your fucking cake and eat it too.
Right.
Like, that's not how these things work. You have to take responsibility for everything that you're doing, everything that you're saying, and everything that you're not doing and not saying. Right. And I think that is part of maturing. And kind of going back to the mental health stuff, it's like, people that truly deal with shit, they don't use that as a crutch. They don't use it as an excuse for how they are acting or what they're doing or what they're saying. Like, they're trying to work through it. They're trying to manage it. They're trying to improve. A lot of the times I don't know, I hate to say it, like fakers or fraudsters or whatever, but people that are maybe like exaggerating things are the ones that are using that as the excuse of, oh, I'm depressed today, so I can't come to work. Or I'm upset, so I need a safe space at work. Or, XYZ.
Yeah. To your point, like you said, it dilutes the message. It dilutes what's going on. The way I think about this, and it's like saying everything's racist or everything's sexist.
Or,
right?
Yes. And I will say this too, and this is something I was going to say, but I didn't say it. But like saying everything is rape or sexual, like, so I wasn't going to say that, but I'll say it because I think that's where my head immediately went before, where it's like, if everyone is crying wolf, then it dilutes the message, like what you said. Coming from a white man, that doesn't necessarily mean as much, right? But I do think that, like what you're saying with, whenever everyone claims that things are racist, or people say that everyone is a Nazi for believing this thing, right? It was like, yeah, well, now it's getting a little bit harder to tell who the actual racists and actual Nazis and actual rapists are whenever everyone is thrown in that bucket, right? We need to be careful with our words. So back to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm glad you said it. I think that that's one of those things that, like, this is a whole different podcast, which I'd actually love to maybe open this up to like a 3-person thing in the future where we have like a woman. Because I think it would be pretty interesting. I remember growing up being afraid of going to jail for rape because my mom pretty much said that, hey, like, you could have sex with a girl and she'd wake up the next day and decide that's not what she wanted to do and tell people, and you would now be classified as this guy, possibly go to jail, like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, that's fucking terrifying. Like, it got to a point to where, like, I used to keep text threads that were years old to make sure that if anybody ever came back and said anything, I'm like, no. I have receipts. I have all the receipts. You cannot run with this story. And that's tragic. It's terrifying. I want to hear a story. I want to hear that a certain athlete or a certain somebody did something to a woman or to a man. And I want to go, fuck that guy. I don't want to go,
I know.
let me know more. Tell me more,
I feel like, when was it whenever it felt like a witch hunt? Was that like a few years ago?
Yeah. I mean, like, it was, I think it was the pendulum swing, right? Because you had all this shit come out, like Ben Roethlisberger and all that, Kobe, all that stuff was like huge.
Forgot about fucking Roethlisberger, bro.
Yeah. And so it felt like, we weren't really going at these guys as much as we could. And I understood what the leagues did, right? The leagues are like, they're trying to stand by these guys until they know for sure they did it, right? And then they obviously had public outcry. And so now it's swung the other way around where, like, if anyone makes a peep, we're taking everything away from you. And then you might come out and be exonerated like a Johnny Depp or whatever. But like, it's tough. And so I get the fragility of the realm that you're playing in. But like you said, I think that it's from the fact that we classify everything under these single umbrellas. You are depressed. That was racist. This is rape. This is that. And you don't leave any room for context, which dilutes the message of the one that, like, hey, this actually needs our focus. There is a Klan rally in Florida that needs our focus. Not the fact that this place has a dress code. is the dress code possibly systemically deterring certain groups of people to come there? Sure. Is the owner possibly racist? Sure. And also, I don't need to like put my energy into that. I don't care to march against fucking Park Street or whatever. Like, it's just call me a bad black person, whatever. But like, that's not my battle, right? Like, let me know about the fucking police that like not police, but the former like sergeant that hunted down that kid in fucking Georgia because he was jogging through their neighborhood and shot him with this like that to me. Like, let's go hang those motherfuckers. Like, that's where I'm at. I don't want to focus on the other shit. So
or like the digging up of 10-year-old Twitter posts where they were like rapping some lyric and they say like the N-word. It's like, do you not have better shit to do than like
people get mad about that stuff, and I literally laugh so hard at it because I'm just like, the fact that Joey Bosa, when he got famous, didn't go to his girl and be like, "Hey, babe, you're getting all new social media. Like, I don't give a fuck how attached you are to this or that." Mostly because just like you understand the world around you. Like, whether you, because I can go back and I'm like, dude, I don't care that they said N-word, bro. Like, I don't care. Like, I don't care about this person or whatever. Now, if they just have hate speech around black people, women, and whatever, like, I care more about that. Like, fuck that person, take their shit away. But like, if you catch somebody just being a kid, I'm like, you know how much shit I've said that wasn't filmed or recorded? Like, if there was a camera walking behind me, they'd be like, nah, bro, we're not gonna fuck with this person.
that's my thing. So like whenever all of this stuff was happening a few years ago, right? So like there have been phases and waves of witch hunts. And dude, you brought up the Roethlisberger one. I completely forgot about that stuff. But like there were waves of these things. So like the sexual assault allegations and all of that. And then I remember like in 2020, it was a lot of like the racism and like, you know, xenophobia or like, you know, anti this, anti that, hatred this, whatever, right? But I remember that there have been waves, and I'm like thinking about my own past. And I'm like, have I ever posted anything that could be even interpreted like this? Like even like joking. Like, has there ever been a time whenever I've joked about something, and if someone were to pull that out of context, it would look bad? Or I'm also
The traffic stop one was hilarious. The traffic stops one was public.
bro, yeah, but like, so there like stuff like that, right? But then even like thinking back, and it's like, okay, like all of like the sexual encounters that you've had in the past, it's like, okay, well, you know, maybe like there was alcohol involved in some of these, like what are the like where are the boundaries drawn? Like, and like you kind of start overthinking a lot of this shit too. And for me, like I'm saying this, but like I'm very comfortable in my past. I'm very comfortable the past as it relates to these things, right? Like we've talked about before, I have a checkered past in other ways, um, but dude, it's like the thing that has always blown my mind about some of this stuff, like the witch hunts, right, is that if you look hard enough at anyone, they become a witch.
Yep.
At anyone, like no one's closet is clean. No one's. And like what you said, if there's a camera following you around, you've said some shit in the past that you would not want to be public, or you've done some shit in the past that you would not want your friends or family to know about. But the thing is that now pretty much everything is recorded. Like there are very few places that you can go that there's not a camera watching you at all times, right? Like that sounds like a little bit dystopian and fucked up to think about, but like it's true. And bro, like you think that Meta can't tap into your microphone on your phone at any time that that they want to, right? Like you think that all of this shit that is around you, that if it were to come up in the future that you were running for president, let's say, right, that people would not find ways or have ways to go back and destroy you.
Yep.
Like everyone has those skeletons. And for me, I think that's always been something that has been difficult for me to reconcile with the aggressiveness that has been put into some of these like campaigns, like smear campaigns or movements, right? Where it's like, man, like this just feels like you're asking for your shit to get blasted whenever the tables turn eventually, because they always do, right? Like you just got to be careful, like who you're anchoring yourself to or what movement you're anchoring yourself to, because if it's like whether it's political or social, whatever, like the pendulum always swings back and forth. So eventually you're going to be on the wrong side of this shit and people are going to come for you too. Like you have to understand that stuff. So, dude, it's always just blowing my mind how people can act a certain way whenever they start to get a taste of a little power, right? And I mean, dude, I mean, this is a completely separate topic, so I'm not even going to try and dip into that. But no, it's just that it's just mind blowing.
It's ironic though, right? Like we're talking about mental health, a place in which everyone wants their actions, their words, their whatever, the way they show up to put into context. And then you have something like this where it's like you strip away all context. You're not allowed to say like you were just young and stupid. You're not allowed to say that you didn't know any better. You're not allowed to say that you've learned and you are now doing this. And you know, it's a weird like dichotomy to like look at, like, because like the same people involved on both sides, right? Like typically the same brained people involved on both sides. You know, I think that when people sit there, coming back to like the people who quickly ascribe themselves as like, this is me. I struggle with this, struggle with that. It makes me feel like you spent more time looking for an excuse for your behavior and what you do than you did looking for how to process it in a way that is more conducive to you being a beneficial member to the societal circle you have, right? You looked, oh, I lash out at people. I do this sometimes. So I struggle with this. And this is what I do. But you didn't spend that same time saying, how can I not prick the people around me? How can I show up a little better? How can I process these things in a way that, you know, doesn't hurt the people around me and does put me in a better position? I look at it like, I said this before on social media, that a lot of people think they're the main character. Like the whole main character era. You're not a fucking main character. Most of you are Lois Lane. Like that's the role that you're playing. Most of you are Lois because you want to be the hero until it gets hard or until you have to own up to some shit. And then you want someone to come in and say it's okay. You want someone to come in and save you and make it all okay.
Bro, so no. What everyone is actually is it's not Lois Lane. What is the fucking the newspaper editor? What's his name?
Oh, Jimmy?
It's Jay something, right?
Oh, you're talking about okay, you're going Spider-Man. Yeah. Fuck, the dude with the mustache.
Lois Lane is Superman. Sorry, yeah. But yes, what's his name?
I forget his name, but I know what you're talking about. Yes. Spider-Man, he's the tabloids guy, right? He's the guy pointing fingers. Skip Bayless, like that kind of character.
That's who everyone, like, well, not everyone. That's who a lot of people are. They're not even the Lois Lanes. They're not even the MJs. They're the tabloid editors. They're the newspaper editors. They're the opinion writers. They're the ones that are telling everyone else what they should be doing, while not
J. Jonah Jameson.
Yeah, bro. I knew it was Jay something. Yeah. But like they're the ones that are telling everyone else what they need to do, how they need to live, what they need to say, what is okay, what is acceptable, but they're not actually living that, right? And this is another thing that you see all the time. It's you see people who are publicly saying one thing and privately doing another. And I've said this multiple times where I'm like, live it. Like if you want people to take you seriously in your opinion, what you're saying in your movement, live it, right? If you're that extreme in what you want, or like if you think that this change is absolutely necessary, right? If you're someone who, again, like kind of anti-capitalist, all these things, right? Bro, don't be sending that tweet from your iPhone. Right. Like live your shit. If you truly believe in a movement, live your shit, you know? And again, it's the same thing with like mental health stuff. You're saying, you know, it's much easier to make an excuse. And I 100% agree with that. It is so much easier to make an excuse than it is to actually do any type of work to be better. But part of the thing is like you can be someone who suffers from mental health issues. And you can also have the awareness to say, this is not who I am. This is not who I want to be. I want to do better. I do not want to make this mistake again. So if you're someone who is prone to lashing out, is prone to, like, let's just say like violent episodes, or, you know, you yell at people and you just like, you disillusion all those around you, right? Like it's just very difficult for you to be around. Well, you can come down off of that high, that anger outburst, and you can view what you're doing whenever you're in a better state of mind, or what you've done, and say, well, that's not who I want to be. I want to do a better job in the future of preventing that from happening. But not enough people actually take that approach. They say, oh, that's just who I am. It's because of my issues that I suffer with, my mental health issues, because I'm bipolar. And because I'm bipolar, that means that like I'm gonna always just get upset sometimes, and I'm gonna be loud, and I'm gonna hurt your feelings, and that's just my bipolar. It's like, well, that's giving context, but that's not the reason. That's not the reason for why you're saying and doing things. It's contextual for sure. But the way that should be approached is I'm going to try my best to rectify this and make sure that this does not happen again. I'm going to do what I need to do on my end to prevent this from happening again. And not enough people do that. Not enough people do that. It's just, again, it's like the pointing of fingers anywhere but yourself. It's outward. It's always looking at excuses that have nothing to do with you actually doing the necessary things to improve yourself.
It's interesting because I look at this, and I think this comes back to like that hyper-rationality, and I don't think that it can be reduced to something as simple as this, but I think that metaphorically it works. Doing something bad, hurting someone, and then blaming it on your anxiety, your depression, your bipolarness, your bipolar disorder rather, and then saying this is why I did it, and like forgive me, like it's okay, like we can be okay, like is like saying as a drunk driver, I cannot be held accountable for the fact that I killed somebody. Right? Because I was drunk. If I was driving under normal, sober, whatever, like I would have been fine. And it's like, no, like that's not how that works, right? Like you made those decisions, you knew this, right? So once you are aware, once you are aware, I can't keep giving you an excuse. I can always understand. I can always have empathy, right? Like we've had it before. Like things are going up and down, and like you start to recluse a little bit, and I'll just check in on you. Hey, what's going on? You check in on me, like if I'm doing this or I'm kind of like scarce or sporadic. And then learning to not take that to heart and go, he's attacking me, right? He's trying to hurt me is definitely important on my end. And also owning up and saying, yeah, bro, I was just struggling with some shit last week. I'm sorry. I'm back. We're good. Like that, like collective ownership of it is to me super, super important. And I don't understand why. To me, it feels so weird because I don't know about you, but I try to, as we probably get ready to wrap up here, I try to wrap my mind around the idea of being able to blame everyone else or everything else for something that's happened to me or how I feel. And there's nothing that makes me feel more powerless. There's nothing that makes me feel like I have zero control. I would kill myself. If I truly, like, I might say that, like, that's truly how I feel. That's how strongly I feel about this. If I felt that I had no control over anything anyway, and especially things with me, what's the point to me in like living? Like to go out and every time something comes up, it's someone else's fault. It's something else's fault. It just seems like such a like really boring and helpless existence. Like it's just a really weird thing for me to try to wrap my head around. Like it's no matter what I'm like, dude, I can have no arms and something could require me to have arms or some other extra limbs. And I'm like, I'm gonna use my mouth, use my feet. I gotta figure it out. I'm not gonna just keep blaming my life on the fact that I don't have arms. This is no disrespect to people who are amputees, because I've seen people who are amputees who have done amazing things without those arms. And so it's not any sort of target at either one of them, so much as it is that like it is possible. And once you realize it's possible, you can no longer say it's not. You can say you don't want to do it. You can say you don't want to do the work. You don't want to overcome your depression. You don't want to overcome this. You don't want to overcome that, because when you want to me, you will work and you will do those things that are constantly doing it. You might never get to the point to where you can say, I'm in remission. This is no longer a thing for me, right? I don't suffer the symptoms of that anymore. But the active effort every single day and trying to get better, to me, is the way you show up and retain power over your own life. The minute you go, not my problem because I can't control it, this is just the way it is, just the way I am, what's the point in living after that? Like, what is the point in continuing to exist if you're willing to relinquish every ounce of power you have to circumstance or other people acting on your life?
Bro, I can tell you're reading Man's Search for Meaning. That's crazy.
It's rubbing off, man. But this is also, very much how I've always felt, which is why I wanted to read the book. You mentioned it, and I'm like, I keep meaning to read it. So it's nice to be able to sit down and be able to dive into it. But I mean, it's huge. Like the minute you sit there and like Man's Search for Meaning, for those who have not read it, by Viktor Frankl, a survivor of concentration camps, right? Like objectively one of the worst places you could probably have been in history, right? And he talks about like his will to keep on and where it came from, and the question we all have to answer for ourselves. And so, as a person who lost a lot of autonomy over his own life, like everything was stripped from him, every sense of self was stripped from him externally, he had to look internally. And I think that to me is a very strong message in that, and the idea that like the minute that you sit there and you start going, you can't because I can't because it's like you probably should pause for a second. Like just pause for a second and think about your involvement in your own existence or in your own actions, and then reevaluate before you continue with that state.
I agree with that. I mean, the reality is that everyone has different fortunes. They have different luck. They have different circumstances. Some people are more privileged than others in life, and that's the reality. That is the world. Life isn't fair, and that isn't fair, but it's true. It is the way that all of this operates and the way that it works. And we can do what we can to try and equalize things and normalize them, but there's only so much that we can do, right? Like if you're born to a billionaire in Manhattan, your life is going to be different no matter how you slice it to someone who's born in a slum in India. Like there are large differences in those upbringings and the opportunities that you have. And same thing, kind of just like going back to some kind of like mental health disorder, right? Like some people are going to severely struggle with mental health. Some people are going to be relatively normal and they're not going to have that handicap. And so you can't always control the situation and you can't always control the circumstances that you find yourself in. But it sounds so freaking stupid and so cliche, but like you can control your reaction. Like you can control the way that you try to grow from that and the way that you try and approach it. And you can control the grace that you show in dealing with bad circumstances. And if you're someone who is consistently looking outward and consistently taking the victim stance, then you're not doing yourself any favors. And I think that that's an important thing to say as well, is that you need to be able to accept some kind of accountability for your life. Like what you're saying, like you need to feel in control of something to be able to actually move forward, right? If you have no control, truly have no control over anything, then what's the purpose? Like nothing that you're doing in life means anything anyway. It's all dictated by someone else or something else. So there's no point in you trying at that point. But that's not the reality. And the reality is that like we all have some aspect of control over some parts of our lives. And at the very minimum, it's how we can respond to the things that happen in our lives. And again, that's pretty easy for me to say being a white dude. But like at the same time, I do think like we've seen it across every spectrum, right? Like there are people that like, again, like the Viktor Frankls, there are people that grow up in slums in India. There are people who grow up in civil wars. There are people who grow up in the worst environments possible. And they're still very positive, optimistic people who continue to work hard for whatever reason. And it's like, well, bro, if they can do it, like your sadness today doesn't all of a sudden seem that bad whenever you're driving in your car to work at your 6-figure job and you're coming home to a family that loves you. Sorry that you're so sad. It's like relative, or things are relative, obviously, right? And I talked about this before, how it's often very challenging to directly compare suffering across different people. But at the same time, like it's not hard to know whenever you have things in your life to be appreciative for and things to be grateful for. Most people just don't take the time to actually notice them because they're so focused on the things that are challenging in their life or the things that are negatives or the things that are struggles. And I mean, honestly, like so much can be done by just literally fucking taking a breath every once in a while and just understanding how good your life actually is. And anyone who's listening to this fucking podcast, like your life is probably pretty good because you have access to listen to podcasts.
Yeah. Like I said, taking a deep breath. And, you mentioned that earlier and I even thought to myself, like and I know like you and I probably think the same, right? Like I don't realize how objectively troubled my childhood or life might look to someone who maybe hasn't experienced things that I experienced until I start recanting stories and I go, wow. And I go, I guess that was pretty fucked up. Yeah. Like when I talk about a story and I go, yeah, and I like haphazardly say, Yeah, and then like my dad like texted me and told me that he only had 2 sons, which meant he was like removing me as one of his sons. Like he now denounced the idea that I was his kid anymore, and I was like 12. And they go, really? And I'm like, oh, I guess that was fucked up. Like you don't really think about it back then, right? Um, and I think it's important to hear other people's stories, not because I think that the person who maybe has gone through a less objective trauma should not complain or should not have a worry. Like, I think it is important to recognize, like, it is, like you said, it's all relative. Your struggle is your struggle, and it's relative to what you've been through. So, a person might be losing their house. Another person might have, I don't know, like be getting a new job and going through that stress. And to them, it feels like the world is crumbling because whatever's going on. And this other person feels exactly the same about losing their house. And objectively, one sounds a lot worse.
Yeah.
You don't want to discredit the person who's going through what they're going through, but I do think that that person hearing other people's stories, stuff like this, sharing, being able to have that open dialogue, I do think that is the cool thing about people being able to share their stories on social media, is that you don't feel alone if you're going through something similar. And also you can put things in perspective so that you can afford yourself to take that breath. Like, hey, today fucking sucks. And so did yesterday. And so did the fucking week before that. And also, I have a beautiful girlfriend. I live in an awesome city. I have 2 beautiful dogs that are healthy. I'm healthy. I can go to the gym. I can walk. I can run. Those are just the solid reminders. And it comes from that perspective of understanding, like, okay, like objectively, my struggle, my strife, the things I'm overcoming are not as big as they could be.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Let's wrap this up.
Sweet. I have I don't know if you have anything on hand. Probably not. I don't know where you keep all your stuff, but because this whole episode, I think, has been about just like reflecting and being able to like grow from the shit we've been through. I think that I have this pretty cool 3-sentence thing I was going to share. And it says, I did the best I could, but if I could do it over, I'd do it better. And I love that. I think I wrote it one day sitting on the toilet, but I think it pays homage to who we were, and it doesn't demonize that person, right? I'm allowed to grieve the map that was wrong, right? I was going in the wrong direction based on what I had, the tools I had, the way I could go, right? All the mistakes. Even if I knew that they were mistakes, I was still showing up the best I could in that moment. And then once I was able to overcome certain things and do it better, I can look back on this and go, oh yeah, now I would definitely do that better, which I think is a really good thing to be able to say. Like, you don't want to regret shit because it made you who you are. And also being able to look back on something that objectively was wrong that you did or partook in, and say, I could definitely do that better, is promising because it shows you that you've made progress and that you're moving forward.
Yeah. I think it all comes down to awareness. It's just awareness. It's being able to pay attention. It's being able to be more objective about yourself and more objective about like your position relative to other people around you and like your position in society. And at the end of the day, I know that this probably is going to be completely oversimplified, but like, I mean, this is kind of the way that I view things, right? It's like, are you a positive or are you a negative to everyone around you? If you're a negative, and that, again, it's like that is making something binary that is not binary. But at the same time, if you are making the lives of the people around you harder or worse, then you are the problem. It's not other people that are the problem. You are the problem. And it is up to you to change something about yourself, mental health or not. You absolutely have to figure out something that you are doing and get rid of it or improve it. And if you're positive, then just continue doing the things that you're doing that are good and continue to isolate and notice the things that you're doing that are maybe detrimental or bad or unproductive habits, and try and slowly phase those out or shift them over to something that is more productive, right? It's the people that get stuck in this rut of stasis that are the ones that are the easiest to like point fingers at everyone else rather than accepting the blame for the situation that they find themselves in. And not, again, like what I've mentioned before, not every situation is your fault or is a person's fault. Bad things happen. Bad things are always going to happen. You can't always control the bad things that happen, right? But also have to be able to take ownership of your own fucking life and your own decisions and your own actions. Mental health as contextual, foundation or not, you have to be able to figure your shit out for the sake of the people around you and for the sake of, you continuing to lead a valuable or productive life or whatever the fuck you define your productiveness or valuableness by. But for myself, it's like one of those things where it's like, am I a net positive or am I a net negative to those people around me? Right. And there have been times that I could say like I was a negative, huge negative. Now I think that I'm back in positive territory, and that is a good feeling, Yeah, but it's like, it's a good feeling. But I think that most people can probably have that honest conversation with themselves and know about where they stand. And there are a lot of people who are negatives. Like, I don't want to get that fucking twisted. There are a lot of people who are actual negatives to the people around them. They're detrimental. They're making everyone's life harder and worse. And those are the people that need to like figure their shit out. Life should not stop for those people. It's unfortunate, but like they need to figure it out. They need to know or understand that they are that anchor. They're kind of a drag, and they need to fucking improve something, right? And if they can't, then they need to seek help immediately. And I think that again, it's very binary in that way of thinking, but I think that is a really simplified way of evaluating some of these things, right? Like if you're struggling with stuff, there's severity to it. Yeah. There's magnitude to it. There are degrees to it. Sadness does not mean depression, right? Like anxiety does not mean paralyzed. Getting energetic and having a little bit of insomnia or making some like, rash decisions doesn't mean you're in a manic episode. So everyone needs to kind of understand where they are, the things that they struggle with, the things that are potentially detrimental to themselves. They need to just fucking slowly start working on it. Like, it's really that easy. But part of it does come from just the self-awareness and then also like the willingness to seek help whenever it's necessary to do so.
100%. I think that's a good spot to wrap up. Only addendum is I'd say that's simple because this shit's not, we know it's not easy, right? We know it's just not easy. I don't think we think it's easy. It is that simple though, just looking inward. But yeah, no, everyone, thank you again for tuning in to this installment of the P2 podcast. We hope that you were able to take something from it. Please, drop us, thoughts, ideas, your own experiences if you're willing to share in the comment section. We'd love to hear. And then, we'll look again for you next time. Again, you can find this anywhere on any listening platform that will take our money. That is Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, probably something else that Bryce pays for. So hit us up, subscribe, and let us know what you think. See you guys next time.
Bye.